Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a true classic of 90s gaming, a title that attempted something incredibly ambitious. Die Hard Trilogy.
Hmm.
Imagine a video game that isn't just one experience, but three entirely distinct gameplay styles, all woven together under the banner of a beloved film franchise. It was a surprising, almost audacious concept for its time, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It really did set the game apart in the crowded landscape of the mid-90s. Very few games are trying anything quite like that.
So for this deep dive, where are we drawing our intel from?
Our well of knowledge today is primarily a comprehensive look at the game itself, mainly through an in-depth Wikipedia entry. It gives a really fascinating behind-the-scenes glimpse into its pretty unconventional development and its remarkable reception.
Right. And our mission, as always, is to sift through that, pull out the most important nuggets, the surprising facts, the unique insights.
Exactly. We want to give you, the listener, a shortcut to being truly well-informed about this cult classic, highlighting not just what it was, but why it was so unique and, yeah, sometimes even a bit controversial.
And unique it certainly was. So it first landed on the PlayStation, right? September 96 in North America.
Then Europe a bit later, December 96. And then the Windows PC and Sega Saturn versions followed in early 97.
And it wasn't just some quirky experiment that faded away. This thing was a massive commercial smash.
Oh, huge. It quickly earned the PlayStation Greatest Hit status and the PlayStation Platinum title over in Europe. That's a really big deal for any game, especially one built on such an unusual premise.
Yeah, hitting those sales milestones is never easy. And that success wasn't just a flash in the pan either. It actually led to a sequel, didn't it?
It did, yeah. Die Hard Trilogy 2, Viva Las Vegas. Though, interestingly, the sequel kept the three gameplay styles idea, but ditched the movie plots for a spin-off story. But before we get into its legacy, let's really break down what made this game such a, well, you called it a triple threat right at the start.
Perfect. So it was developed by Probe Entertainment, UK-based.
That's right, Probe Entertainment in the UK, published by Fox Interactive over in North America, and Electronic Arts, EA, handled the distribution in Europe.
And it wasn't just like your standard movie tie-in job.
Not at all. It felt like a deliberate attempt to capture the feel of each of those first three movies through different kinds of interaction, different gameplay. And clearly, it worked. People responded incredibly well to the sheer variety it offered right out of the box.
Which brings us to that core identity. An action game, sure, but you just couldn't pin it down to one genre.
Nope. And that's the fascinating part. It wasn't just a little bit of variety, it was three distinct gameplay styles, each meant to represent one of the first three films. Die Hard, Die Hard 2, Die Hard with a Vengeance.
That's just wild for the time. It wasn't just a gimmick. It was like getting three games in one package. An incredible value proposition.
Absolutely. That genre bending was key, but it also must have created some serious headaches during development, which we'll definitely get into. But yeah, its success, both critical and commercial, was just really impressive given how complex it must have been to pull off.
And it led to that sequel, Viva Las Vegas, which kept the format but went off script story-wise. Shows the original's impact, I guess.
Definitely. But yeah, let's rewind. Let's unpack each of those three segments, starting with the first film, the original Die Hard.
Okay, so segment 1, Die Hard. Puts you right in John McClane's sweaty vest, doesn't it?
Pretty much. It was a third-person shooter, set, of course, in the iconic Nakatomi Plaza from the first movie.
And the objective was classic McClane, take out the terrorists.
Take out the terrorists, yes. But, crucially, also rescue the hostages scattered throughout the building. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a run and gun.
Right, you mentioned that. It had more of a tactical layer.
Exactly. That segment was actually widely praised for having a pretty deep challenge. It wasn't just about reflexes. You genuinely had to try and outthink the enemies.
How so? Like flanking and cover, or...
Well, you had to navigate this multi-story building pretty carefully, manage your ammo, which was limited, prioritize targets, and maybe most importantly, you had to protect the hostages.
Ah, so if you accidentally shot a civilian...
Big penalty. Yeah, it directly impacted your score, your progress. Yeah. It added this layer of tension, this need for careful shots that a lot of action games back then just didn't have. It felt less like an arcade blast fest and more like a tense rescue operation. Really contributed to the good reviews, especially in PlayStation.
Okay, so from tactical third-person shooting in a skyscraper, the game completely shifts gears for the second movie.
Completely. Segment 2, Die Hard 2. Die Harder, we go from Nakatomi Plaza to Dulles Airport. And the gameplay. Totally different. It becomes an on-rails shooter.
Right, like an arcade light gun game. The game moves you forward, you just point and shoot.
Precisely. You're on a fixed path, and your main job is aiming a crosshair and blasting terrorists as they pop up. Very much like those classic arcade shooters, yeah. You're plunged into the chaos of the airport takeover from the second film.
And how do you control that crosshair? Just the standard controller?
You could use the standard gamepad or a mouse if you were on PC, but ideally. Used a light gun. That gave you the much more, immersive and intuitive arcade feel.
Okay, light guns. Now, wasn't there something specific, kind of quirky, about the light gun compatibility for this game?
Yes. Absolutely fascinating detail for gamers of the era. Die Hard Trilogy on the PlayStation was one of the few light gun compatible games that did not work with Namco's GunCon, or G-Con 45 as it was sometimes known.
Which was basically the standard, right? Everyone seemed to have a GunCon for Time Crisis.
Exactly. It was almost the default PlayStation light gun. So if you had a GunCon, you were actually out of luck for Die Hard Trilogy. You needed a different compatible gun, like Konami's Justifier, for example.
But the Saturn version was different.
Yes. The Saturn version was compatible with Sega's own light gun, the Stunner. So depending on your console and the peripherals you owned, you might have had a very different hardware requirement to get the proper experience. A bit of a compatibility minefield.
So what did that mean for players then? If you were on PlayStation and only had a standard controller, or maybe the wrong light gun?
Well, that leads directly into one of the most common criticisms of the Die Harder segment. If you didn't have the right light gun, especially on PlayStation, and had to use the standard controller, the crosshair was widely described as being really slow, sluggish, difficult to move accurately, trying to snap onto targets quickly, which is essential in an on-rails shooter, became really frustrating.
I can imagine. It kind of defeats the purpose of that fast-paced arcade feel.
It really did. It highlighted how much that segment was designed around the light gun input. Without it, the experience could feel compromised, less enjoyable. The fluidity just wasn't there.
Okay, so we've had third-person tactical shooting, on-rails, light gun action, and then, just to keep you completely off balance, the third segment arrives.
Die Hard with a vengeance. And boom, another complete genre shift. This time, it's a driving game.
Seriously, like full-on driving.
Full-on, high-octane driving. Suddenly, you're not clearing buildings or airports. You're tearing through the streets of New York City in a taxi, a sports car, even a dump truck.
A dump truck? Nice.
Right. It captured that chaotic, citywide chase feel from the third movie. You're basically on this frantic joyride, as the game put it.
And the objective? Just cause mayhem?
Well, there was plenty of mayhem, but the core goal was to find and defuse several bombs scattered across the city before their timers ran out. So it's race against time, weaving through traffic, trying to hit specific locations. Very high stakes.
An open-world-ish driving game set in NYC back in 96, 97? That sounds incredibly ambitious.
Oh, it was. And this segment, the vengeance driving part, is actually the key to understanding the game's really weird, unconventional development story.
Yeah.
It wasn't planned as part of a trilogy at all initially.
No way! So this whole 3 games in one thing wasn't the plan from the start?
Not according to the inside scoop, no. It seems the Die Hard, with the vengeance driving segment, was actually developed first. Probe intended it to be a standalone release, just that one game.
Just the driving game. But why Die Hard Trilogy then?
Publisher influence. Fox Interactive apparently stepped in and, insisted that the game needed to be more closely tied to the whole film series, leveraged the full franchise power.
Makes sense from a marketing perspective, I guess. Buy one game, get the feel of all 3 movie.
Exactly. So that publisher mandate led Probe to basically go back and develop the other 2 segments, the third-person shooter and the on-rails part, to bundle them all together. So yeah, an accidental trilogy, in a way.
That's fascinating. A single driving game ballooning into this massive 3-genre project. But wait, you mentioned Probe was also working on Alien Trilogy at the same time.
Yes, another huge movie license. And that game, Alien Trilogy, was being published by Acclaim Entertainment, who had recently acquired Probe.
Okay, so Acclaim owned Probe and was publishing Alien Trilogy. What did that mean for Die Hard Trilogy?
It meant Die Hard Trilogy was kind of the Underdog project internally. Because Acclaim was publishing Alien Trilogy, that game got the priority. All the best, newest technology, the cutting-edge development tools, and crucially, the most experienced programmers and designers. They were all assigned to Alien.
So Die Hard Trilogy was left with?
According to the accounts, it was developed by a small team of young programmers and designers working with Probe's oldest equipment.
Get out. The game that became a greatest hits title, sold millions, was made by a junior team on hand-me-down gear.
It seems like it. It's a fantastic aha moment, isn't it? It just shows incredible resourcefulness and, frankly, talent from that small team. Pulling off something that successful under those kinds of constraints is seriously impressive.
No kidding. And it makes even more sense when you hear how they actually designed the thing. The lead programmer, Simon Pick, said something pretty revealing, didn't he?
Oh yeah, it's a classic quote now. He basically said, "There was no real design. We made it up as we went along."
Made it up as they went along for a major movie license game.
Apparently. He elaborated, saying, "We knew the overall feeling we wanted and the various points we wanted to hit gameplay-wise. We had a design document, but it was written after the fact."
So they'd build a feature, then write it down for the publisher.
That's what he said. We'd implement a feature, and the designer would write it up to send over to Fox as an update. It sounds incredibly improvised, almost like jazz game development.
Wow. How did that affect the game, do you think? That kind of loose approach.
Well, you could argue it contributed to that varied, maybe slightly experimental feel the game has. Because they weren't locked into a rigid plan from day one, they could maybe react and iterate more freely. Hey, let's try this. Okay, cool. It works. Put it in.
But it still held together. It didn't feel like a mess.
Amazingly, no. Despite that no real design approach, it achieved a surprising level of coherence across the three parts, and obviously it found a huge audience. It really speaks to the skill of that team, managing to keep it all on track, even without a strict blueprint. Maybe that freedom, born from necessity, actually helped.
Maybe. But promising 3 games in one, with that small team, old gear, that had to lead to some serious technical problems, right?
Oh, absolutely. The team apparently found they had bitten off way more than they could chew, promising 3 distinct games. It inevitably led to technical compromises and some really clever but probably stressful problem solving.
Like what? What had to give?
Well, take the Die Hard 2 segment, the on-rail shooter. The initial plan was apparently to have fully polygonal 3D enemies, which would have looked much more solid and, three-dimensional.
But
rendering all those complex models on top of everything else the game was doing across 3 different engines, it was just too much strain, especially on the PlayStation hardware they were using. So those polygonal enemies got swapped out for digitized sprites.
Sprites, like 2D images?
Yeah, essentially pre-rendered 2D images of the actors or models. Think like the characters in the original Mortal Kombat or Doom. From some angles, they could look a bit flat, almost like cardboard cutouts.
A visual downgrade, then?
Technically, yes, compared to true 3D models. But it was a necessary compromise. It saved a ton of processing power, which allowed them to keep the frame rate up and the action smooth, which is absolutely critical for an on-rails shooter. Performance trumped visual fidelity.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the vengeance driving segment? That huge NYC map must have caused headaches.
Huge headaches. Remember, they initially wanted an authentic recreation of New York City.
Which sounds amazing.
Amazing on paper, yeah.
Yeah.
But then they hit a snag. The lead programmer, Simon Pick, pointed out that when you're driving at like 200 miles per hour, a realistically scaled NYC actually feels tiny and really restrictive.
Huh. Never thought of that. You'd hit the edge of the map too quickly.
Exactly. It wouldn't feel like this epic, sprawling city chase. It'd feel like driving laps in a small box. So realism had to bow to gameplay feel. They needed a bigger city.
But how could they fit a bigger city into the PlayStation's RAM? Which was tiny back then, right?
Absolutely tiny, yeah. We're talking maybe 2 megabytes of main RAM. So loading a whole massive, custom-designed NYC, impossible.
So the solution?
Ingenious, but sounds like a nightmare to implement. They divided their custom, larger NYC model into numerous smaller sections or chunks. Then, they had to design a custom system, running constantly in the background, to figure out which section the player was about to drive into, and load that specific section into RAM just before they got there, while simultaneously unloading sections they'd left behind.
Streaming the city on the fly. On a PlayStation 1.
Basically, yeah. A primitive form of level streaming.
Yeah.
And apparently, getting this system to work seamlessly, without obvious loading pauses or visual glitches where the section is joined, it required them to go in and fix the resultant errors by hand. Just imagine meticulously tweaking the geometry and textures at the edge of every single city block to make it look seamless at 200 miles per hour. The dedication is mind-boggling.
Wow. Okay, so they were pulling off these technical miracles. Let's talk platforms again. You said PlayStation was the lead.
Yeah, Simon Pick made that call. He strongly felt that it was the most powerful format of the time.
Which, looking back, was probably fair.
Probably. And his reasoning for developing on it first was quite strategic, especially with limited resources. He figured if they pushed the PSX version hard, made it look as good as possible,
Then the teams doing the Saturn and PC ports would have a high bar to aim for.
Exactly. They'd be trying to replicate or emulate those impressive effects, rather than having to design everything around, say, the Saturn's potentially more complex or perceived limitations from the get-go. Set the standard high, then adapt downwards.
Makes sense. So what kind of adaptations did they have to plan for the Saturn specifically to get it running smoothly?
Because some great examples, like lens flare effects. On PlayStation, they might use 6 or 7 circular images layered together to make it look really convincing.
Okay.
For the Saturn version, to save processing power and keep that frame rate up, they plan to cut that down to maybe 2 or 3 images. A visibly simpler effect, but necessary for performance.
Frame rate was king.
Always. He also mentioned plans to reduce the detail of the models quite a lot and significantly reduce the amount of texturing. So, quote, the roads on Saturn will probably be flat shaded, so it's like a gray road rather than having textures.
Flat gray roads. Oof. That's a noticeable difference from textured asphalt.
Big difference visually, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it's all about making those pragmatic choices to ensure the core gameplay felt fluid and responsive on the target hardware. It's a classic trade-off from that era.
And wasn't there something about Sega helping out?
Yeah, a little tidbit mentioned was that some clever Sega guy actually wrote a specific program for them. This program could automatically identify very small polygons in the scene and just skip applying textures to them altogether. Another smart optimization to squeeze out performance, shows the kind of collaboration that sometimes happens.
Incredible stuff. All that effort, the improvisation, the technical juggling, and it clearly worked out in the end, didn't it? The reception was huge.
Oh yeah, it totally defied its somewhat chaotic origins. Commercially, it was a monster hit. Sales went over 2 million units by the year 2000.
2 million. That's massive for the mid-90s.
Absolutely. And for Probe Entertainment specifically, it became their biggest seller ever in the UK. A huge success story for them, especially given those resource constraints we talk about. And that success led directly to the greatest hits and platinum re-releases.
And critically, how did the reviews look, especially for that lead PlayStation version?
Very positive overall. It holds something like an 86% average on game rankings looking back. Really strong.
What was the main thing critics latched onto?
The overwhelming consensus was the sheer value proposition. Getting 3 distinct, pretty substantial games in one box was seen as incredible value for money. That was almost universally praised as its biggest strength.
But was there debate about whether the individual games were actually good on their own?
There was, yeah. A bit of a split. Some reviewers argue that, okay, the package is great fun because of the variety, but maybe none of the 3 component games are good enough to stand on their own as truly top-tier titles. The strength was the mix, the collection itself.
So the sum being greater than its parts.
That was one camp, yes. But interestingly, the majority view seemed to be more generous. Most major outlets at the time, your IGNs, GameSpots, EGMs, they tended to argue that all 3 component games were outstanding even on their own terms. They felt each segment offered a strong, compelling experience in its own right, not just as part of a bundle.
So mostly high praise. But was there anyone who really pushed back against that, a major dissenting voice?
There was, yeah. GamePro offered a more critical take. While they admitted the game was addictive and had great sound, they argued that the 3 segments were essentially just well-polished copies of other popular games. They said it was basically, respectively, Resident Evil, Virtua Cop, and Twisted Metal.
Ouch. Calling them rehashes.
Pretty much. Not saying it was bad, but suggesting it wasn't particularly original in its core mechanics, just a good compilation of existing ideas. Which is a valid, critical perspective to consider, provides some balance.
And did that light gun issue with the Die Harder segment come up a lot in reviews?
Oh yeah. That was probably the most consistent specific complaint. Review after review mentioned that the second segment really requires the Konami light gun to be enjoyable. That sluggish cursor with the standard controller was a real sticking point for many.
But the first segment, the tactical shooter, that got praised.
Almost universally, yes. Praised for its deep challenge, the need to be strategic to outthink the enemy. That part seemed to really nail the Die Hard feel for a lot of people.
Okay, so great sales, mostly great reviews. Did it get any actual awards or industry nods?
It did. It was a finalist for a pretty significant award at the Computer Game Developers Conference in 1996. The category was Best Adaptation of Linear Media.
Adapting a movie into a game, basically.
Exactly. Which is notoriously hard to do well. It ended up losing to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, a very different but critically lauded adventure game. But just being a finalist in that category was a big deal, recognizing how well it captured the spirit of the films.
And he wins.
Yes. Electronic Gaming Monthly, EGM, which was hugely influential back then, their editors named Hard Trilogy their action game of the year. That's a major accolade.
Okay, solid recognition. Now, how about that Saturn port? It came out a bit later. How did it stack up?
The Saturn version. Yeah. Well, it also got mostly positive reviews, but the comparisons to the PlayStation original were often unfavorable, which, given the development priorities and planned optimizations, maybe isn't too surprising.
So reviewers noticed the differences.
Seems so. GamePro, for example, pointed out that the graphics weren't as sharp, especially in the die-harder segment, which aligns with what Pick said about simplifying effects and textures. But crucially, they still said the gameplay is addictive enough. So, visually less impressive, but still fun for them.
But not everyone was so forgiving.
Right. Josh Smith over at GameSpot had a much more critical and actually quite nuanced take on the Saturn port. He felt the sluggish controls and poor graphics compared to the PSX version made the first two segments, the shooter and the on-rails part, nearly unplayable. He found lining up shots too awkward and frustrating.
Ouch. So for him, the optimizations really hurt the core gameplay in those parts.
That was his assessment, yeah. For you, TT. And this is the fascinating part. He then completely flipped his opinion for the third segment.
The driving game.
Yeah. He said the Vengeance segment on Saturn had animation actually better than the PlayStation versions, and that the sheer speed and dark humor of that driving part made the entire game worth buying on Saturn just for that one segment alone.
Wow. So the part that was originally the whole game ended up being the strongest part of the Saturn port, even better animated than the lead platform.
According to that one specific influential review, yes. It's a really interesting outcome. It shows how uneven ports could be, and maybe how certain types of gameplay or engines just happen to map better to the Saturn's different architecture, or perhaps benefited more from those specific optimization choices.
Did other Saturn reviewers agree it was uneven?
Not entirely. Paul Glancy at Sega Saturn magazine gave a more balanced, positive view of the whole package on Saturn. He argued that all three sections delivered their fair share of thrills, great visuals, and clever ideas, pushing back against the idea that compilations always have weak links. So differing opinions even among Saturn reviewers.
Okay, one last really surprising detail about its reception. It got banned somewhere.
Yes, in Germany. Completely banned.
Banned? Why? Just general violence?
It was banned by the BPJM, the German body that reviews media potentially harmful to young people, specifically because of its extreme violence. But the key reason often cited, the thing that really seemed to push it over the edge for them, was the Die Hard with a Vengeance segment, where you could deliberately drive through harmless people with blood spilling all over the windshield. That specific act, the graphic depiction of running down civilians in the driving section, was deemed unacceptable and overly violent according to German standards at the time.
Wow. So a feature that was maybe meant to be darkly humorous or just part of the chaotic driving mayhem got the whole game pulled.
Effectively, yes. It's a stark reminder that cultural norms and regulatory bodies view content, especially violence against non-combatants, very differently around the world. What was acceptable or even darkly funny in one market could lead to an outright ban in another. Adds a whole other layer to the game's story.
Okay, what a ride. Nakatomi, Dulles, NYC. So when we step back and look at Die Hard Trilogy now, what's the big takeaway? We've got this bold 3-games-in-1 concept born partly by accident, developed under constraint with this wild improvisational style.
I think connecting it to the bigger picture. This game is just a fantastic case study. It's about adaptive design, about resourcefulness under pressure. It shows how sometimes creative freedom, even if it comes from not having a strict plan or tons of resources, can spark something genuinely memorable and innovative.
And it really highlighted that value proposition, didn't it? The importance of variety.
Absolutely. It proved that an ambitious, unique concept, even from an underdog team on older tech, could absolutely capture the imagination of players. It really stands as a testament to the kind of experimentation and daring design we saw a lot of in that PlayStation era.
It really does. For a game made by that small team on old gear with no real design document to start, Die Hard Trilogy just smashed expectations. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? About that relationship between having a rigid structure versus allowing for more spontaneity and making something creative. Is the detailed plan always best?
And that leads to a really interesting question for you, the listener, to think about. We live in an era now of hyper-specialization in game development. Huge teams, years of planning, massive budgets, often focused on perfecting one specific genre or experience. Could a game like Die Hard Trilogy, three distinct genres, developed somewhat improvisationally by a small team, even get greenlit today? Probably not easily.
Right. So if the answer is likely no, what do we gain from today's highly structured, specialized approach? And, maybe more provocatively, what potentially vital spark do we lose? What happens to that kind of unexpected innovation, that creative daring, that sheer, almost reckless variety that a game like Die Hard Trilogy managed to deliver against all odds? Something to ponder.